Do you know who the woman was who stayed with King David until the very end? It was not Bathsheba. It was not Michal. The Bible records her as a Shunammite woman from a rural village. Shunem is a countryside village far from Jerusalem. She was not famous in history, but she became the most important person in David's final moments. One day, the king's officials suddenly visited that place. It was to find David's last wife. Was it a glory for the family? Or was it the sorrow of a lifelong separation? In fact, David was not a rising sun. He was a setting sun. His energy was waning, and his body was growing colder. His wisdom was also fading, so no one wanted to discuss state affairs with him. People were only curious about where the pendulum of power would swing next. In such a situation, becoming David's woman was perhaps like entering a valley of misfortune. Abishag was a teenage girl. She had to be separated from her family without knowing why. The place she arrived at was glamorous but like a prison. Her mission was only one thing. It was to warm David, who was aging and growing cold. Faced with this cruel fate, she had no right to refuse. This was the cold face of power at the time. In the world of power, her personal happiness did not matter. The palace demanded her sacrifice for the king. David was once the hope of Israel. He defeated Goliath. He inflamed the hearts of the people with a new vision. But now, his arms had become thin like dry firewood. Even layers of blankets could not warm his cold body. So, the king's officials brought her as his last wife. That place was never a seat of wealth and glory. Rather, she had to spend each day in tension and fear. Guarding the side of the old David, who was facing death, was a very difficult position. Inside the bedroom, it was as silent as death. But outside, it was the calm before the storm. The sons fought. Each claimed he would be king. The officials who were loyal to David until yesterday did not look for him anymore. They were busy lining up for the new power. The palace reeked of blood and desire. While everyone was drunk with ambition, only one person remained sober. She was the only one guarding the king's dignity. David's fourth son, Adonijah, knew that the successor appointed by David was Solomon. So he raised a rebellion. He won over the priests and military commanders. He had chariots and cavalry escort him. Loud noises could be heard from beyond the bedroom. David's era is over now. Whispering sounds must have been heard too. It was a miserable reality. David had fought for God and Israel all his life on the battlefield. But now he was ignored simply because he was old. Abishag was a witness who watched this whole process of betrayal in silence. The only person guarding David's side now was the frail teenage girl, Abishag. The blanket she covered him with was the only warmth David could feel. Although the shadow of death covered David, Abishag fought against that darkness. She struggled to keep the flickering lamp alive. The sons waited for their father's death. Perhaps even Solomon did the same. But Abishag was different. She must have prayed earnestly tonight for the king's safety. She prayed for warmth to return to his cold body. Theologian Eugene Peterson described her like this: Abishag is the single shining light amidst the darkness and confusion surrounding David's deathbed. She had no ambition. She had no schemes to gain power. She did not look to see who the next ruler would be. She did not line up behind anyone. She only hoped for David's energy to recover. Of course, it was an impossible hope. Still, she cared for David with that one heart. She was a woman like a small, unextinguished flame, announcing the recovery of the perishing Israel. God often works through such humble people. He plants seeds of great history in unexpected places. Why did the author of Kings record Abishag's story first? It was not simply to introduce David's last woman. This was God's message to the falling Israel. The Book of Kings was written when Israel was destroyed and taken captive to Babylon. The author wanted to reveal the reason why Israel perished. He wanted to find a spark of hope for the ruined Israel. From the author's perspective, Abishag was a spark of hope. Although she was a powerless and frail teenage girl, he discovered hope in her appearance. She guarded David's side until the end. I believe this is why the story of Abishag was recorded at the very beginning of Kings. When David died, Abishag's fate was pushed to the brink. In the turbulence of the struggle for the throne, Solomon defeated Adonijah and became king. Although Adonijah rebelled, Solomon could not kill him because he was his brother. However, Adonijah went to Bathsheba and made a shocking request. "Please give me Abishag as my wife." Abishag was clearly David's woman. But Adonijah did not consider Abishag as a mother. He considered her a trophy of power. Perhaps he thought he had yielded the throne, so he wanted to possess the king's woman. In ancient society, taking the former king's concubine was a way for successful rebels to show off their legitimacy. That is exactly why Absalom violated the concubines when he rebelled against David. Adonijah's request was a twisted desire for power. Solomon immediately saw through the intention and dealt with it decisively. If he hadn't coveted Abishag, he would have saved his life. But Adonijah, who harbored wrong greed, was eventually executed. Abishag must not have known what to do in the midst of the bloody power struggle. Whether Solomon intended it or not, he consequently protected Abishag. She was the one who had guarded David until the end. There is clearly God's amazing providence in this event. On the surface, it looks like Solomon protected her. But in fact, God protected her. God does not forget mercy, even on the day of judgment. He protected Abishag, the small flame that warmed David's cold later years. Human greed brings destruction, but God's grace brings salvation to the innocent. Then, what meaning does this story of Abishag have for us living today? I want to share 3 lessons. First, God looks at our center, not our ability. Numerous people in the palace chased power and ability. But the person God paid attention to was Abishag. She had no political power. The world may demand a higher position and more achievements from you. However, God values your pure heart. He values the heart that silently conveys warmth in the place entrusted to you. What is more important than flashy success is faithfulness in your given place. Second, the deeper the darkness, the brighter a small flame shines. David's later years were a dark age spiritually and politically. Everyone was stained with betrayal and ambition. But Abishag was the only shining candle. Do you feel that your community or workplace is cold and harsh? Then, please be the Abishag who warms that place. Anyone can criticize and leave, but only a person with a mission can keep their place and share warmth until the end. Third, God protects the nameless until the end. Abishag almost became a scapegoat in the power struggle. Adonijah treated her as a trophy. But God did not abandon her. Even if the world tries to use you as a tool, do not be afraid. God is the one who does not quench a flickering lamp. He does not break a bruised reed. God will remember your devotion and lead you to the safest path. The world may forget your name, but your labor of love is never forgotten in heaven. Abishag was a symbol of hope. If you feel your life is cold and lonely, think of Abishag. God never extinguishes the lamp of hope, even in the darkness.
Logos Global Academy currently streams in 11 languages and is expanding to over 20 languages to reach every corner of the globe. Please subscribe and become a member to empower this massive global mission. Thank you so much.